Bhagavati Om Namo Bhagavati Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavati Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Nasta Preshu Abhareshu Nityam Bhagavati Sevaya. Bhagavati Uttamasloke Bhakti Bhavati Naistihiki. Today we are reading from Canto 5, Chapter 14, The Material World as the Great Forest of Enjoyment. Text 28 through 36. Text 28. Sometimes the conditioned soul is attracted by illusion personified, his wife or girlfriend, and becomes eager to be embraced by a woman. Thus he loses his intelligence as well as knowledge of life's goal. At that time, no longer attempting spiritual cultivation, he becomes overly attached to his wife or girlfriend and tries to provide her with a suitable apartment. Again, he becomes very busy under the shelter of that home and is captivated by the talks, glances, and activities of his wife and children. In this way, he loses his Krishna consciousness and throws himself in the dense darkness of material existence. Text 29. The personal weapon used by Lord Krishna, the disc, is called Hari Chakra, the disc of Hari. This chakra is the wheel of time. It expands from the beginning of the atoms up to the time of Brahma's death, and it controls all activities. It is always revolving and spending the lives of the living entities from Lord Brahma down to an insignificant blade of grass. Thus, one changes from infancy to childhood to youth and maturity, and thus one approaches the end of life. It is impossible to check this wheel of time. This wheel is very exacting because it is the personal weapon of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes the conditioned soul, fearing the approach of death, wants to worship someone who can save him from imminent danger. Yet he does not care for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose weapon is the indefatigable time factor. The conditioned soul instead takes shelter of a man-made god described in unauthorized scriptures. Such gods are called buzzards, vultures, herons, and crows. Vedic scriptures do not refer to them. Imminent death is like the attack of a lion, and neither vultures, buzzards, crows, nor herons can save one from such an attack. One who takes shelter of unauthorized man-made gods cannot be saved from the clutches of death. Text 30. The Sweda Swamis, yogis, and incarnations who do not believe in the Supreme Personality of Godhead are known as Pansandis. They themselves are fallen and cheated because they do not know the real path of spiritual advancement, and whoever goes to them is certainly cheated in his turn. When one is thus cheated, he sometimes takes shelter of the real followers of Vedic principles, Brahmanas, or those in Krishna consciousness, who teach everyone how to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead according to Vedic rituals. However, being unable to stick to these principles, these rascals again fall down and take shelter among Sudras, who are very expert in making arrangements for sex indulgence. Sex is very prominent among animals like monkeys, and such people who are enlivened by sex may be called descendants of monkeys. Text 31. In this way, the descendants of the monkeys intermingle with each other, and they are generally known as Sudras. Without hesitating, they live and move freely, not knowing the goal of life. They are captivated simply by seeing the faces of one another, which remind them of sense gratification. They are always engaged in material activities known as gramya karma, and they work hard for material benefit. Thus, they forget completely that one day their small lifespans will be finished and they will be degraded in the evolutionary cycle. Text 32. Just as a monkey jumps from one tree to another, the conditioned soul jumps from one body to another. As a monkey is ultimately captured by the hunter and is unable to get out of captivity, the conditioned soul, being captivated by monetary sex pleasures, becomes attached to different types of bodies and is engaged in family life. Family life affords the conditioned soul a festival of monetary sex pleasure, and thus he is completely unable to get out of the material clutches. Text 33. In this material world, when the conditioned soul forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and does not care for Krishna consciousness, he simply engages in different types of mischievous and sinful activities. He is then subjected to the threefold miseries, and out of fear of the elephant of death, he falls into the darkness found in a mountain cave. Text 34. The conditioned soul suffers many miserable bodily conditions, such as being affected by severe cold and strong winds. He also suffers due to the activities of other living beings and due to natural disturbances. When he is unable to counteract them and has to remain in a miserable condition, he naturally becomes very morose because he wants to enjoy material facilities. Text 35. Sometimes conditioned souls exchange money, but in due course of time, enmity arises because of cheating. Although there may be a tiny profit, the conditioned souls cease to be friends and becomes enemies. Text 36. Sometimes, having no money, the conditioned soul does not get sufficient accommodations. Sometimes he doesn't even have a place to sit, nor does he have the other necessities. In other words, he falls into scarcity, and at that time, when he is unable to secure the necessities by fair means, he decides to seize the property of others unfairly. When he cannot get the things he wants, he simply receives insults from others and thus becomes very morose. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Vidya Mataji. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept our humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada and Bhakti. Please take over the call, Prabhuji. Do you want me to stop the sharing?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Mataji, can you see my screen with the text 28?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you, Vidya Maharaj Mataji, for reading our translations today. And thank you, all devotees, for kindly taking out your time to come this morning and hear something about Srimad Bhagavatam. Although I'm not qualified, but for the pleasure of all assembled Vaishnavas and for my own purification, we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, text 28 to 36. I'll start by offering my prayers. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे मुखं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयति गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुदीं तारणम् Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So I'll just quickly recap what we've been discussing so far in this particular chapter, chapter 14, which is the material world as a great forest of enjoyment. So thus far we have seen in Canto 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam, we are in that segment where we are hearing the wonderful discussion between an exalted devotee of the Lord who takes his third birth in the particular story as Jadabharat. And when he encounters a king, Maharaj Rahugana, how their encounter, first it begins as him serving him and carrying his palanquin, and subsequently, once the king chastises Jadabharat and Jadabharat starts to speak out of compassion to give knowledge to the king realizes that he is a very elevated soul, and he takes shelter of him to learn more about spiritual life. So while explaining some very high subtle topics about spirituality to Maharaj Rahukana, Jadabharat, he starts describing an allegorical story in which a merchant who's represented by a soul, he enters into the forest, enters into the material world, and all the tribulations that he has to face in this material world by the Jivatma. So some of the topics that we covered in the previous few discussions, we understand that the soul is troubled by senses, just like the merchant is troubled by rogues and thieves in the forests. The soul is also troubled by family attachment, the ones who hamper his spiritual life. And they are compared to like the wild animals in the forest who attack the merchant. The envious people are compared to mosquitoes and mice who unnecessarily cause trouble to the living entity. And the government who keeps exalting tax from the soul, the living entity, is compared to like the owl in the forest, forever sending warnings and reminders and messages, and always behind the soul. And the python, sleep, is compared to the python or the snake that takes away our period of consciousness during our lifetime. So all these miseries the soul has to suffer in the material world. Now, in text 28 to 36, some of the topics that we'll be covering today would be attraction towards the opposite gender, influence of time, the effect of pashandis or false gurus, talk a little bit about miseries in this material world, and the last topic Prabhupada covers is a topic about cheating tendency. We will begin with text 28. In this text, it is described how the living entity, once he enters into the grihastha ashram, or I may say grihamedi ashram, he becomes very much enamored by the opposite gender. And he gets entangled with that attraction. And as he gets entangled in that attraction, he slowly forgets to lose his spiritual consciousness. And he becomes more and more convinced that he is the body, and how he suffers because of this misunderstanding. The idea behind that although grihast ashram is mentioned as one of the four parts of the varna ashram, the real grihast ashram, the real reason for what we call vivah, that is the Sanskrit word for wedding, is that it is a vishishta vahan. Marriage is a specialized condition that is afforded in the varnashram system, where two souls come together in order to help each other to grow in spiritual life. They come together so that they can serve each other, they can complement each other's deficiencies, and make as a team advance together in spiritual life, which may be difficult for each of them to do it individually. However, when we see in modern day life, the relationship, the reason people come together is more for sense gratification. It's more centered on I and not we. How many times have we heard, when couples argue, they make this argument, what have you done for me? In this 20 years that we've been together, what have you done for me? So we always keep I or me in the center, and we forget that actually the center should be we in the relationship. When we understand more and we uplift our consciousness from being a Grihamedi to a Grihasthashram, we actually understand the center should not even be I or we, but it should be Krishna. That what are we doing together for Krishna? In the past year that we've been together, how have we helped each other and come closer to Krishna? However, unfortunately, the center remains I and we. I'll share a joke with you all. There was once a man, he was looking for wedding, and he had gotten two marriage proposals. So he goes to this mystic, and he says, sir, I need your help. I have two marriage proposals from these two wonderful women, and I can't decide, whom to marry. I don't know who's going to be the lucky one. Can you please tell me, look into my future and tell me who's going to be the lucky one that I should select? Um, thinking himself to be great. So the mystic, he takes out his crystal ball and he looks into the ball and he says, this looks interesting. He says, the first lady is the lady you're going to marry. And the second one, she's going to be the lucky one. So he puts water onto this man's aspirations. So similar way, Prabhupada explains in the purport that actually the living entity is not meant to be the enjoyer. The living entity is Prakriti, or the energy of Krishna. It is meant to be enjoyed. So the supreme enjoyer is only and only Krishna. But in this particular relationship, when living entities come together, they are so enamored that they forget this concept and they try to be the enjoyer. And as a result, a lot of marriages fail because we can never be satisfied in this position, because this is not a constitutional position. Moving on to text 29, now we see the influence of time in this material world. So it is described that Lord Krishna's disc, the Hari Chakra, is like the weapon of time. Just as the disc moves in round and round, time also moves around, and it erodes away our lives of the living entity in our current bodies. Prabhupada quotes in the purport, Harim vina mritim na taranti. No one can save himself from death without the shelter of Krishna. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Devi hi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya, that this material energy, Maya, is under my control. So without taking shelter of Krishna, it is impossible for us to escape the influence of Maya or escape the influence of time. In one of the recent lectures I'd heard from my Guru Maharaj, he said that to say that Maya is strong is a gross understatement. We cannot even fathom the power of Maya. So for us to be able to conquer Maya, or to even make an attempt to it, is just almost impossible. But the only way that we can do it is not ourselves, but if we take shelter of Krishna. If we take shelter of Krishna, Krishna can always protect us and deliver us. Prabhupada used to say a Bengali phrase, Rakhe Krishna, Mare Ke. Mare Krishna, Rakhe Ke. Means if Krishna protects, who can cause us misery? But if Krishna causes us to go through our suffering because of our karmas, then who can protect us? But the living entities, when they go through suffering, they approach so-called false gurus, who are, because of their mental concoctions and not having any scriptural basis, they try to cheat these people, the living entities who try to approach them in this way. And because they don't have any scriptural basis, they give solutions which are very temporary. And the living entity also tries to adopt these temporary solutions, thinking, okay, if I do this, or if I do this tapa or this yagya or this fasting, then this particular problem, I'll be delivered from it. But not realizing that that is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate, to understand that we can be happy in this material world is a myth. Prabhupada used to give the example of a battlefield. That he said that in a battlefield, there can be no peace or no happiness. Because, sometimes, if you're in a trench and a war is going on and a bomb falls close to you and you're saved, you may temporarily think, I'm saved and I'm going to be happy, I'm going to celebrate. No, you don't celebrate because the very next moment, another bullet or another bomb may fall next to you. So we realize that this material world, there's always misery coming, whether we want it or don't want it. And we don't look for happiness in this world. Like Prabhupada said, there can be no peace on a battlefield. If we really want peace, we have to understand that we have to transcend this material world and into the spiritual world. So what happens is, because these other living entities, these souls, and so many people we encounter during our preaching movement, they try to concoct some material solutions. They don't realize, because their basis of search is that we can be happy in this world, that they strongly believe that there's a solution possible for this happiness. So the truth is actually that if we tell a lie very loudly and in numerous times, then that lie can be accepted as a false truth. And if enough people repeat that lie, repeat the false truth, and enough people agree to the false truth, that false truth becomes a culture. among a certain set of people. And if that lie, which has become a false truth, which has now become a culture, is repeated and transmitted to a second generation, then that becomes a tradition. And many people who are born into this tradition, they are from birth sort of programmed to think like this, that if I do such and such, I'm going to be happy. The way I was taught, and most people, most of us are taught, in life, to be happy, you need degree, you need naukri, and you need chokri, right? You need to have education, you need to have a job, you need to get married and settled in life, and all will be good. But this is based on a presumption, which in itself is false, that you can actually be happy in this material world. So, because this tradition is based on a culture which is based on a false truth, which is actually a lie, that we realize that this can never actually come to fruition. But the only way we can truly be happy, find our real identity, is by surrendering to Krishna, and only He can deliver us from the effects of Maya and bring us back home. In text 30, we see that how these pseudo swamis and incarnations, they do not believe in personality of Godhead, and they present their own concocted philosophy. Prabhupada describes in the purport that there are different paths to human birth. So people who are like cows in the previous life, they enter into a human birth full of mode of goodness. People who are like wild animals, like lions, they enter into the human birth in the mode of passion. And the people who are monkeys, and they enter into the human birth in the mode of ignorance. So because of it, they are suffering under these modes of material nature. Now, when we try to find solutions, Prabhupada had also commented separately, that if we are, like, the modern science tries to find solutions for all our miseries in this world, and tries to increase our propensity for sense gratification. But Prabhupada says that if you're running around on four legs, if an animal is running around on four legs, and we are running around on four wheels in our big cars, but we're actually looking for the same thing, eating, mating, sleeping, and defending, then we're not much different from animals in what we're doing. Instead of trying to make this material life, to find more temporary solutions, we should actually do what's called root cause analysis of why we are in this material world and why we are suffering. And as a result, when this living entities, they realize these temporary solutions are not working, sometimes they are attracted to devotees and they come in the association of Krishna conscious people. However, because of their previous karmas, sometimes they're not able to follow the rules and regulations, and they fall down again. So what happens is, when they fall down, they intermingle again with people who are in this monkey-like consciousness of sense gratification, and are generally known as Shudras. Now, the Shudra mentality is, they're only interested in what Prabhupada describes as Gramya Karma, just day-to-day activities. How I'm going to get my food, how I'm going to get a nice house. So just fulfilling our basic needs, but not understanding the need of the soul. Now, let me give you an example. Suppose you board a train, and we're sitting in a train, and we meet somebody else comes and sits across us, and we strike a conversation with them. So we may start and saying, "Hey, how are you doing, sir?" Then you just normally ask, "So where are you coming from?" And that person would say, "You know what? I don't know." And you get taken aback, like, "Sorry, what? You don't know where you're coming from?" Okay. Okay. Then you carry on the conversation and say, "Okay, sir, so where are you going?" And the person says, "Oh, you know what? I don't know. I'm not sure." And you're like, I think this person's crazy. And so maybe let's find out more. And then you ask him, so you don't know where you're coming from, and you don't know where you're going in the train. Do you know what you're doing here? Like, why are you here in the train? And the person was like, I'm not really sure. So that at that moment, you probably step out and call the police for help. Like, you're like, this person's crazy and he needs some help. So similarly, in this journey of material world, in this life, most people get onto the train without knowing these basic questions. Where they're coming from, what are we really doing here, and where are we really going at the end of life? Everybody knows that death is certain. It's only a matter of time for each one of us But nobody explores that question of where we have to go and what we have to do in this material world to understand the answer to that question. So that's from this text. In text 32, we describe in the story it is described that just as a monkey jumps from one tree to another, the conditioned soul jumps from one body to another. So as the living entity, as the monkey jumps into one tree and he enjoys sense gratification with the other she monkeys in that tree, jumps to another tree and continues to enjoy sense gratification in that ways, a living entity, he takes different births. He takes one birth, he has a certain set of family members, he enjoys sense gratification with them, he gives up that body, gets into another birth, in another body, and then continues enjoying sense gratification. In this way, because of what Prabhupada describes as a festival of momentary sex pleasure, he gives up the ultimate goal of life, not understanding, not being able to come out of the clutches of. In text 33, and now the living entity starts realizing that although the sensory pleasure is momentary, the misery happens forever and continues to come despite his not wanting miseries. The truth is that if we don't serve Krishna, then we serve Maya. And the effect of Maya, we're always forever going to be miserable. In a text called Prema Vivarta Puran, there's a statement, कृष्ण बहिर्मुख होना भोग वंश करे निकट स्था maya tare japati adhare. At the moment the living entity turns his face away from Krishna to enjoy bhoga, to enjoy sense gratification, Maya is standing right next and she grabs hold of that living entity as soon as he turns his face away from Krishna and subjects him to multiple miseries. In text 34, we go on to describe that how the living entity suffers so many miserable situations. Now, growing up, we always had our idols and people we looked up to, and especially when we're in our teenage years, in our formative years, we have, some we may have role models, sports personalities, movie stars or politicians that we always enamor. And I had my own set of people that I looked up to. But when I explored into their life in a little bit more detail, I actually realized that their life, the amount of suffering that they've had in the particular lifetime, leaving aside the glamour and the glory, that was something which was terrible, and maybe I did not want those for myself. Prabhupada in many places describes, actually the Bhagavatam describes this material world as something called Parvarga. So in Sanskrit grammar, there are the different alphabet sequences are described as vargas. So there is cha varga, there is ta varga, there is ta varga, and then there is pa varga. So this very interesting way that the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's an amazing literary work. So it describes this material world in a phrase, in a term called pa varga. So the pa varga, the sequence of alphabets in Sanskrit grammar, they go as follows: pa, fa, ba, bha, ma. So in that, the reason material world is described as pa varga, uh, so it's a pa represents parishram. So in this material world, the living entities have to do lots and lots of parishram, especially those people I used to look up to as my role model. So sports stars, movie stars. So they have to, in order to achieve that success in life, they had to undergo lots and lots of tribulations and hard work and everything, and sometimes try to overachieve. While doing all this endeavor, they start to get exhausted in life. They start to lose their energy in life. Described as the next fur as fera in Hindi, in Sanskrit, or foam in English. So when you work like donkeys or asses behind some material goal, you start to foam in the mouth. Just like the end of the day, the donkey, he starts getting exhausted, his tongue falls out, he starts foaming in the mouth like a donkey. And what happens as a result of all this hard work and this forming and some of the temporary fame that they achieve, the living entity gets bound to this. Prabhupada describes in a couple of places the per for ber as vyathat. In other place, another devotee described as bandhan. So he gets bound to this temporary fame and temporary success that he's achieved. And when he gets all these temporary things, now he's in tremendous fear and anxiety of losing it. You see a lot of these famous personalities, they resort to different means like taking intoxication just in order to really get relief of the anxiety. So they now are under influence of bha or bhaya, that is fear. So they live constantly in this fearful situation. And at the end of pa, fa, ba, bha comes ma, which is mrityu or death. So the living entity goes through all these different experiences, and finally everything is taken away from him in the form of death. In the last two shlokas, in text 35 and 36, there is the influence of cheating propensity that's described. So it is described that usually when the living entity is dissatisfied and wants to engage in sense gratification, he runs behind money, but not realizing that in order to achieve money or more money in this world, he has to take course of cheating. Um, Once upon a time, there was a farmer who found a bag of gold coins in his field, and he came to Gautam Buddha, and he approached Gautam Buddha and said, Gautam Buddha, I found this bag of gold coins. What should I do? And Gautam Buddha said, immediately throw it away. This is not a bag of gold coins; it's a bag of snakes. It's going to come and bite you. But he didn't take heed to the advice. He used that money and kept spending it, and word spread about it. And king or the dacoit who actually that money belonged to, he came and started creating trouble and nuisance for that particular farmer, to the extent that the farmer realized what a mistake he had made, and he comes back and seeks forgiveness for Gautam Buddha and not giving heed to his advice. So similarly, in similar way, we realize that wealth, money that is come through cheating, can increase our greed and cause us to go through many suffering. Sometimes by cheating, we may escape. We may escape. We may hide from society. We may hide from government. We may run away from one country and hide in another country. But we can never run away from the influence of karma. Wherever we are, if we do something by wrong means, the influence of karma will always catch up to us. And when he cannot get the things he wants, he simply receives insults from others, and this becomes very morose. This is the sorrowful situation that the living entity goes through in this forest of material world, that is very wonderfully described by Jadabharatu Maharaj Rahugana. With this, I'll end our discussion today. Please forgive me if I made some mistakes or said something shouldn't have said. वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णवृंद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। हरे कृष्णा।
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for a very nice class.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you all devotees for joining. Just